Okay. We settled. That's it. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Our final presentation of the day is Continuous Risk Assessment, Unveiling Its True Worth or Just Hype.
Thanks, Anish. We stand at a very important juncture today on how best to use our growing wealth of data. And this dynamic approach is risk assessment that we will be treated today, and it could enable insurers to make precise, timely decisions, enhance risk management practices, and ultimately provide better protection and value to policyholders.
So, Petra, over to you.
Awesome, thank you very much. And everyone, thanks for joining at 4:20 on, it feels like a Friday, but Thursday afternoon. So I suppose in insurance, in life insurance, we certainly claim to be experts in understanding mortality and morbidity risk. But in truth, we're probably more better stated to be experts in classifying and understanding risk at the start of a policy. And then a whole host of different scenarios play out in practice, depending on lapses, who lapses, and really also what happens to our policyholders' health over time, some of which is modifiable and we can have an impact on, and some which is not. But significant changes in the data landscape actually means that there's a potential for us to start to rethink how we approach risk and risk understanding, and what that really means for us in the insurance world. Now, looking at wearable data, wrong place. Today I'm talking about continuous risk assessment, and what I really mean by that is the process of tracking, interpreting, and quantifying risk over future policy lifetimes. In the context of life insurance, CRA, or continuous risk assessment, implies an ongoing view of mortality and morbidity risk that a policyholder exhibits over the future coming years. Now, the truth is, the way the world has progressed, we now have access to a whole host of potential data sources that allows us to form a view of risk and how it's changing on a continuous basis. Today, I'm specifically focusing on using wearable data as an example in this presentation, but it's important to point out that there is really a whole host of alternative data sources that can provide an indication of risk on a continuous or near continuous basis. So the same concepts and considerations hold true to whatever form of data you use, although each will have its own merits and its own drawbacks as well. So specifically focusing on wearable data today, an immediate assumption could probably be that I'm talking about average number of steps taken or heart rate. And yes, tracking steps over time certainly does have a strong correlation with mortality and emerging mortality, as you can see in the graph on the presentation. However, when I'm looking at average number of steps, an average number of steps taken over a specific period of time, it certainly doesn't give us a full picture or an assessment of the mortality risk. And I would certainly be hard-pressed to accept a history of a person's average number of steps taken in lieu of an underwriting risk assessment. It's a little bit like obtaining an HIV test or something like a gamma GT, and then trying to make and draw conclusions around the full mortality risk. This data is definitely useful and it certainly adds value, but it's clearly insufficient. Now, technology has really changed, and already there are an increasing number of providers that are able to provide a really good proxy of risk at a much more holistic level. So the graph on the screen shows the correlation between a health score as determined by a wearable device. So a provider has taken wearable device output and performed a whole host of calculations. And they give us a so-called health risk score. And that is correlated with a traditional underwriting risk assessment. So, our traditional life underwriting process where the individual completes an application form. We send them for a whole list of medical tests depending on their age, their sum assured. And then, depending on what disclosures come out as part of the application form, we might send them for supplementary tests, investigations, and probably an additional host of medical questions. So, firstly, you'll see on the right-hand side of the graph that there is this very strong correlation between individuals that we typically classify as standard lives as part of the life insurance underwriting assessment, and this health risk score as determined by a wearable device only. On the other extreme, on the left-hand side of the graph, you'll see that individuals where we deferred, declined, or included pretty substantial loadings show this very poor health risk score on the other hand. And then in between, there's a whole host of different things happening there. So I think the first important takeaway from this is that this information is already out there. This information exists. Information that's able to provide a proxy for a very traditional life insurance risk assessment, only using something coming from a device on someone's arm. Now, I think it's worthwhile to stand still for a second and to reiterate what that means. We can get a very similar risk assessment by interpreting wearable data in comparison to all of these traditional investigations that we perform. Now, secondly, this investigation was performed, and this correlation is performed at initial underwriting stage. But really what it means, because we're considering wearable data, it means we have a view of what's happening with the risk, and an individual's risk changes over time, so on a continuous basis. Well, I should say as long as the individual continues to wear their device. So our traditional insurance process generally assesses someone's risk up front. It's followed by some often very limited engagements over the policy lifetime, and then an eventual lapse or a claim. But continuous risk understanding allows us to really start rethinking almost all aspects of this typical journey. So I think as actuaries, we, and certainly I, am pretty quick to jump to a potential pricing application of this risk understanding. But there's huge potential from understanding risk that sits very much outside of a pricing application or a pricing discussion. So I suppose at a high level, we believe that there are opportunities that can be summarized in the following three key areas. Number one being the underwriting and distribution approach. The second, of course, is a pricing and a potential product discussion. And thirdly, it's prevention and really starting to look at real in-force management. And I'll spend a little bit more time on each of these in turn. So firstly, we should consider whether we can or whether we should incorporate this type of information into the underwriting process. Our research, and this is initial research, but it certainly shows that there's very valuable information that's available that could really easily augment or add to the information that we use as part of our underwriting assessment. It certainly has the potential to simplify the current process. The current experience of completing an app form, then making an appointment with a nurse to go do a whole host of tests, then in turn waiting for an underwriter to look at the assessment, potentially having to go for additional tests with additional forms, is a pretty cumbersome process. Yes, we are certainly doing a good job at understanding and quantifying the risk. which is really vitally important. I mean, that's certainly a big part of the way we do and we should do life insurance business. But it also means that policyholders easily wait 6 weeks, often longer, to be offered insurance cover. Now, that is really a cumbersome customer journey. I'm by no means suggesting that we throw out the current rule book. It's definitely way too early for that. But there is a very real possibility that we would at some point be able to replace our current approach and our current risk assessment approach with something along these lines. So I really believe that it's time for us to start experimenting with and starting to understand what the implications of this type of information could be for us in the insurance world. We need to start understanding what the shortcomings are so that we're in a position where we can make real informed decisions on whether this is something that could or should be considered in the way we want to do insurance business. Now, I think equally on the distribution side, it's worthwhile to ask the question whether there are opportunities for wearable devices, wearable device companies, to play some kind of a role, distribution role in our industry. Do we start considering and thinking around embedded insurance that's distributed via wearable devices that have a stronger focus on health management, health monitoring, and tracking over time? There are complications, of course. All wearables are definitely not made equal. There is no standardized, universally kind of accepted approach to interpreting wearable data. Sorry. Did I? In any case, let's see. Apologies, okay. This should be right. I'm a bit short, I can't see the screen down here. So, sorry. So all wearables are definitely not equal. And I think when we start looking at risk understanding, risk assessment, all companies do this in a very fundamentally different way. So that makes users, such as insurance companies, of this data, it makes it pretty complicated. Now, again, this data is being transformed into information via a whole host of pretty complicated and cumbersome calculations done by non-actuarial people, which makes it a pretty difficult measure to interpret and understand. I certainly am not a big fan around a black box type of approach, but just because I don't currently understand how this is done and what it exactly means, doesn't mean I shouldn't pay attention to it. And then, of course, it allows for some product and pricing opportunities. So this pay-as-you-live, save-as-you-live type of concepts are words that have been thrown around for a fairly long time. So, and of course, those of you that attended the life insurance debate yesterday morning around protection and value, these conversations are vitally important. We really do need to discuss and to interrogate what we believe is appropriate and what is fair to offer to our policyholders. While we always need to ensure that we remain true to the core purpose of insurance, which is to provide cover and certainty of cover when individuals need it most. It's not inconceivable to imagine a world where life insurance products have an automatic claim qualification or a claim payment trigger. So something like a so-called biometric product. So on the occurrence of some type of event that your wearable or this health monitoring device picks up, we could automatically trigger a payment that could really assist in policyholders' experience and treatment of these types of events. I think that's really exciting, and it feels like it has the potential to really meet a specific need of our policyholders. And then I want to move on to where I believe this technology can really start to change the way we do business. As I mentioned, understanding risk on a continuous basis means that we can see and we can understand when that risk changes. So this has a massive potential and potential value to all of us. I suppose following on from the debate the other day, it's both to shareholders and our policyholders. Early warning signals before a CI event can help to reduce, to delay, or potentially even prevent these types of life-changing events from actually occurring. And I think the technology is coming and it's increasingly making these types of solutions possible. Statements and concepts like in-force management then take on an entirely different meaning. And the potential that sits for all of us in those long-forgotten books becomes really something of significant value. How many lives could we alter and change their outcomes? And in the process, also impact and affect our emerging, as in the insurance companies, emerging outcomes. Now, to stand still, the graph here is an illustration of some of the information that we can extract from wearable devices for a couple of individuals over a three-month period. And really what this illustrates is that, of course, someone's health status and the quantification of their health status is never static. It changes over time, and it changes sometimes for the better, other times for the worse, and for some, lucky probably few, it remains relatively stable. But if I zoom in on one specific example, you'll see that kind of with the red dot there, there's a definite and noteworthy change happening in this company's quantification of mortality risk of this individual. And so the provider that determined these calculations or these wearable outputs estimates that there's almost a 40% deterioration in the individual's risk stemming from that significant change at that point in time. Now, whether we agree with that quantification of 40% is actually almost irrelevant at this point in time. The fact is, that is really useful information to us. It provides us, as insurers or the wearable device company, an opportunity to intervene and to suggest some interventions or follow-up. And that's really where the preventative aspect can start to play a huge role in our emerging experience. Now, I've heard feedback that before something like a stroke occurs, there are small physiological changes that start happening up to a month before the actual event occurs. Now, this technology in time will be able to flag when these changes start occurring. So this technology is already able to detect I should say, probably flag underlying conditions with FDA clearance. So the FDA has given kind of the stamp of approval that these conditions are being flagged appropriately. Conditions such as sleep apnea is a one specific example that these wearable devices are picking up. And so sleep apnea is a really interesting one to pay some attention to. So this is a hugely prevalent and highly undiagnosed condition impacting, they estimate, between 20 and 30% of the US adult population. What makes this interesting in the life insurance application is the fact that these individuals have a 30% all-cause mortality increase. And that's for individuals with only moderate sleep apnea. Now, if we can use these types of devices to flag these individuals and get them appropriate treatment, we estimate that we can have a mortality risk saving of something like 2 to 3% from one condition. Now, those numbers really start adding up when we start thinking around the potential of these types of solutions. Now, these wearable device companies are saying, and they're spending a huge amount of effort and money into expanding this universe of disease flags. And so they estimate that over the coming 18 to 24 months, they would be able to pick up 40 underlying conditions. Certainly something that we should be paying attention to. So in conclusion, This data already exists. Data that allows us to understand risk on a continuous basis. And the quality of this data will continue to improve and increase and expand. We need to start having more of these conversations on how we would approach this, how best to use this type of data. We need a view on how and if we should incorporate this into our pricing or product frameworks, and what opportunities this can bring to us on the insurance side. Because we really do have the opportunity to fundamentally change the value that we can bring to our policyholders and shareholders alike. And that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, I open up the floor. I do have a question in the meantime myself. Petra, you spoke about a black box approach, and that is not, as you say, what you're lobbying for. But can you talk about wearable data as an assessment tool versus issues of personal privacy for an individual member who would believe that they're entitled to all the same benefits as other members through other traditional means?
Well, I think that's certainly why I'm saying product and pricing doesn't necessarily need to be part of this discussion. I mean, I think there's huge potential there, but some people are quite concerned around the sharing of their very personal data. And so I think the opportunities that this type of information gives us and our policyholders to potentially prevent these massively impactful events from happening, I think the focus should be there. So yes, I mean, I think this is definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution. I think there are certainly people in the world that will never be interested in these types of solutions. But there is also a whole host of other people where health and trying to live as healthily and long as possible without kind of diseases from like ever occurring is a huge part of our population as well, and we can offer solutions to them. So yes, data protection will always be a concern, but I think this data really starts becoming valuable when collected en masse. So I think it's something we really should pay more attention to.
The gentleman at the back, and then next.
So I think there are two things. I love it. I think risk management, in a sense where it actually helps your customer, is super valuable. I think people don't trust insurance companies, so it's going to be a hard sell for them. But from an underwriting perspective, I think one of the primary goals of an underwriting process is to make sure that the data you're viewing is actually the person that you're underwriting. Whereas if you're underwriting based on a wearable, I'll just get my thin brother to wear my watch for a little while and then I'll submit that data.
My thin and very fit brother.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's also, yes, it's a valid point. I think that technology is also moving where you do have now I forget the exact words, but essentially a physiological signature. And so I won't necessarily know that it was you that did the initial assessment, but I will know whether it's you that continued to wear the device. I know it doesn't perfectly protect us, but we will see how this unfolds.
Gentleman with the mic in the middle row.
So my question is more about the practicality of that trigger point where you notice something's gone wrong. How do you balance, being an insurer and wanting to protect the shareholders' interests and saying to the policyholder, look, we want to help you, but in actual fact it's because, we're trying to defer a claim, and giving that value back to the policyholder kind of thing?
Well, I think personally, if my insurance company said to me, please go see a doctor, we're quite worried about you, and that prevents me from having a stroke, I think I'd be okay with that. And sure, whether it's because they want to not pay the claim, I think I don't necessarily mind. But I think it's also fair to be quite upfront about it. What's good for the insurance company in this case is also good for the policyholder. And so everyone wins as part of this type of solution.
You have a question?
Yes, hello. Hi, PETRO, here.
Sorry, I can't.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant presentation, thanks. Questions around the score and how that was created. Can you share any more detail as to what goes into the score from the devices and perhaps what might have come up as an important dimension to create the score?
Yeah. So that is, again, where I definitely do not understand all of the maths and the science that goes behind that. So these scores were done by computational systems biologists and physiologists and people with a much better understanding of how human physiology works than I ever would. And so I suppose at its core, a lot of that risk assessment is based on cardiovascular risk, but there are other elements that's incorporated in there as well. This gets quite blurry. So something like how well you sleep can arguably have a pretty big, give you warning signals around things that has gone wrong. But most often, people sleeping between 5 and probably 9 hours, that doesn't give you any additional information. But people on the extreme end of the sleep spectrum certainly gives you a valuable flag. So I think this is where a lot more work will be done over the coming years. And this is where I struggle to wrap my head around how much of this data should I just consume and potentially look at trends over time versus understand. And I think that's something that we're probably starting to grapple with more and more as the universe of data expands in society at large. So we certainly can't understand and check for emerging experience on everything that we're going to have to use in the future. So I don't have the answer for you yet.
We have another question in that same area. Gentlemen?
Thanks, PETRO. This is actually very interesting for me personally. But to just maybe digging a little bit into the financial benefits for the insurer versus the health benefits for the policyholder. But to what extent do you think the financial benefits that accrue to the shareholder are going to sustain in the long term if, for example, the interventions being done by the insurers are going to begin to affect, say, long-term mortality and morbidity rates and using those rates in the pricing exercise?
Yeah, so I suppose the more conditions we prevent and pick up, your mortality rate and your prediction of future mortality should reduce. So it should be more affordable for arguably for your policyholders going forward. And so yes, the additional value generated in time does reduce. But again, I think technology continues to improve and hopefully the types of conditions, underlying preventative measures that come through will continue to increase. I think it's also, I didn't touch on it, but I mean, of course, these solutions don't come for free. You have to pay for these types of solutions. And so I suppose the health economics also starts playing a pretty important role. I mean, it's fantastic if you can pick up everything, but it doesn't help if it costs you 10,000 Rand a year. So I think we do need to pay attention to how much it costs as well. So something else that I didn't really go into too much detail on.
Gentleman in the aisle, you'll be our final question today.
All right, thank you, Petra. Again, I think I like the presentation. I think the idea of such solutions which simplifies the process and also obviously reduces the cost for the insurer, also ultimately benefits the policyholder as well. So I'm supportive of that. But more, the question is to your last point about the penetration of the devices themselves with from our potential policyholders and existing policyholders. What proportion do you say already have these devices from which you can collect the data?
So I think, again, this is something, so the specific example that I'm using is not a wearable device that an awful lot of people have. So this is not a solution that is yet scalable in that sense. So it's not going to be 5% of your policyholders. I think where we're starting to pay some attention to is, if you can save 2 to 3% of your mortality claims, there's a whole pot of money that we could potentially use to give these types of solutions to our policyholders. Equally, I think, I should also say wearable device companies are starting to kind of split into two. So one being the smartwatch type of route, and then the other being more health monitoring devices. And so we're starting to pay a lot more attention to health monitoring devices as opposed to just your traditional smartwatch. And I think there'll be interesting changes coming over the coming years in terms of those developments.
Cool. I think we've got to cut it there, unfortunately. Maybe you can catch PETRO after. We will run out of time. But PETRO, thank you so much. I think as Henk said, we'll definitely love it. This is definitely for the future, but unfortunately lots of capitalists in the room, so more about the insurer's profit than the altruism view that you took. Before we play the closing video, do you want to just wrap up for us,
I'd
Lester?
just like to say thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This is our final session of the day. It was an insightful day and a privilege from my side as an industry outsider to witness the people in this room and at this convention, and of course the speakers in this particular room. We started off with a presentation sharing a practical solution to key performance indicators under IFRS 17. I was then corrected. No, it's IFRS, says some accountants, but no, actuaries call it IFRS 17. Is that not correct, Sanesh? And then after the plenary session, a new framework and methodology to enhancing reserving techniques in the general insurance space, and then the preceding presentation provided insights into climate risks, and then of course we ended off with a fascinating, thought-provoking conversation by PETRO.
We've come to the end of the 50th ASSA Convention in a year where ASSA celebrates its 75th anniversary. How special is that? I think we can all agree it was a great convention with great papers, debates and plenary sessions. Thanks to all that attended and presented. Your participation and involvement made this event so much more special and engaging. As such, I also thank the organising committee and Africa Agenda for putting it all together. Planning an event like this takes months. We appreciate the effort and the time put in to get us here. In particular, I thank Roxanne, the chair of the committee, the respective leads of the various work streams, Catherine, Chris, Logan and Simon, the rest of the committee and the staff of the ASSA office under the leadership of Michelle. You've done a sterling job. Costa, as incoming president, I'm sure you also have something to say.
Thank you, Chart. I agree. It's been an absolutely brilliant convention. We've seen some great and very respectful debates. We've seen some thought-provoking papers, and we've seen some excellent presentations. Thank you to all of you that have made this possible and have made this happen. May the next 75 years see us not only lead, adapt and thrive, but also lead with foresight, relevance and innovation. Let's carry forward the legacy of excellence, commitment and collaboration, ensuring our profession remains at the forefront of shaping a secure and prosperous future. Let's remain relevant to every South African out there. We're ending the convention in style with cocktails and a dinner event at the Aurum this evening. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody that has purchased their tickets this evening. Bring your dancing shoes. I have no doubt we're going to have a lot of fun. The convention would also not have been possible without our sponsors and exhibitors. I'd like to thank you all for the invaluable contribution you have made in making this convention the success that it has. I'm not going to read out all the names, but you can see them all on the slide. Without your support, this would not have been possible. Thank you once again. I look forward to seeing everybody next year in Cape Town. Until then, take care, be safe, and have a wonderful end to the year. Thank you.